ACCA, the world's most forward-thinking professional accountancy body.
Welcome everybody to this episode of Careerwise, in which it's a bit of a follow-on from a previous episode we did on psychometric testing. This time we're going to be talking about behavioural assessments. They go hand in hand, they're similar but different. Firstly, I'm going to introduce our expert. Joining us again, Ben Williams was our expert who walked us through psychometric testing, and he's here once again.
Hi everyone. My name is Ben Williams. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist. I run a company called STEN10 and we design behavioural and psychometric assessments. So I'm the person that people love to hate, but I can also hopefully lift the lid a little bit on these tools, how they're built, what they're looking for and how to do your best.
Perfect. So yeah, literally the person who should know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, I'll set the scene a little bit. I mean, we talk about a recruitment funnel where you have a lot of people at the early stages of any recruitment process and you get fewer and fewer people until you make your hiring decision. Behavioural assessments tend to come towards the end of that funnel because they're quite labour intensive, quite time consuming for you and for the assessor. Psychometrics tend to come a bit earlier. That's when you might get 1,000 people who might sit a reasoning test or something like that. But here we're talking about behavioural assessments, which generally tend to be direct observations of your behavior. So whereas in a personality questionnaire, you might say, I like to meet new people, I like to work in a planned and organized way, a behavioral assessment sets you within a particular scenario and sees whether you do. So it sees whether your behavior matches what you told them perhaps at an earlier stage in the selection process.
Right, that makes sense. And once you get to an interview, your behaviour is being assessed. But behavioural assessment specifically might be a bit more constructed situations. Would that be correct?
You get some quite crazy behavioural assessments that are not designed by occupational psychologists, but you need to be aware of them.
So say, for example, you might be in a group discussion and they might say, here's a list of, the one I came across recently was, here's a list of famous people. You're in an aeroplane that's going down. Who should get the parachute in priority order?
Wow.
And it's a list of like famous people. You need to say, should this person get the parachute or should that? So that's a little bit more on the, I guess, the informal side of things. At the other end of the spectrum, the type that we design tend to be trying to simulate the job. So maybe if you're joining a graduate program, it might say, well, look, you're part of a group that's organizing a social event, maybe a conference at the end of the year. You need to plan resources, budget, the speaker timetable. And it's a chance for the company not only to see how you behave in that setting, especially when you need to cooperate with others, but also to give you some insight into the job and the culture of the company that you're joining. So I would always keep in mind with these behavioural assessments, you are judging them as much as they're judging you. If you spend a day going through these activities and you say, that was like pulling teeth, that was awful, then you're probably not going to enjoy the job itself or maybe the culture. And sometimes we design it to include some of these downsides of the job so people can say, okay, some people that'd be motivating and other people that would be a real turn off.
Sure, that makes complete sense. And what sort of businesses do these? Is it only the big ones? Can it be smaller companies as well? Is it always done in a centre? Is it done online? Is it done individually, or is it always in groups?
It's really varied. I mean, assessment centres have been around since, the 1950s is when they began. They used to be, I guess, the preserve of the larger organisations. It was the telecoms company AT&T that first introduced them. And when I began my career about 25 years ago, it was the large companies that we were working with. But I think there's been a real movement over time where people have got more confident in designing their own exercises. They've become a little bit more expected as part of the recruitment process. So I think you'll find some kind of behavioural assessment as part of most selection processes, whether you're joining a startup or whether you're joining a large established company. And they'll really vary. I mean, sometimes they will be a day-long event. There was a real move naturally to host them online during COVID. Since then, I think many employers are realising that they're perhaps missing something by not having people coming in on site to have a look round, to meet their future work colleagues and to sell the benefits of joining them and the office environment in which you'd be part of. So I'd say that they're probably about 50-50 now, online versus face-to-face. Sometimes you'll be part of a big group. I'd say normally this is up to about 12 people. I've seen them up to 50, which is a logistical nightmare, as you can imagine. But you might be on your own. I mean, it might be that if you're applying to a relatively small company, you won't be doing a group discussion, but you might be doing something like a role play, or you might be asked to do a presentation or a written task.
I guess the next question would be, so let's say you've been invited along and part of the interview process is an assessment, a behavioural assessment. Can you prepare for these? If so, how?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. If I contrast it with preparing for a psychometric test, often we say, do some practice ones, and that'll help you to understand the format, and away you go. With a behavioural assessment, it's harder to do a practice group discussion or a practice case study. I mean, there are some out there that you can do, but I think it's probably different advice for different exercise types. So it's perfectly okay for you to ask, if they haven't said, what type of exercises will there be on the day? Can you give me a little bit of an insight? And if they say something like, well, let's run through some of the different types. So a case study would be a written task. So you're going to be presented with a large amount of information. It could be charts, tables, website extracts, etc. And you might be asked to say, summarize some of this information that's in here and tell us what your priorities for action would be. So it might be that a company gives you an array of different potential new office sites that they might want to move to, and you need to review the information, environmental surveys and all that, and decide which one you'd recommend. Now, some of that's probably going to be brushing up on your confidence in interpreting financial information. So a little bit like for the numerical reasoning test, just make sure that you're relatively quick at being able to work out what the profit margin might be, what that might be over a number of years. An interesting thing around case studies now is, of course, the advent of generative AI, and the most forward-looking companies will say you can use ChatGPT in order to get your answer. However, but they might say, we'd like to know how you use ChatGPT. So share the prompts that you used, show us how you maybe revised the first output that you got and improved it, and how you iterated. So that might be an interesting thing to find out. Again, you can always ask. They can always just say, we can't reveal that information. But if you are expected to use ChatGPT, then I would just say being open about how you've used it and not being afraid to say that you went through multiple iterations. I expect everyone that's listening to this podcast will have used it to some extent, but if you're not a confident user, then make sure that you've had a good play around with it. Make sure that you can iterate and improve outputs, and make sure you're just aware of some of the potential limitations of ChatGPT as well. So for example, in a case study exercise, if I was asking it to review that type of information and come back with recommendations, I would probably then try a few follow-on questions. So I might say something like, if I were to critique the answer that you just gave me in the harshest way possible, what might you say? So then it goes through a round of critiquing itself, and then you say, and how would you improve that? So I'd say that would be the most forward-looking companies, but the majority probably will still sadly expect you to work it through by hand. So if you've got, like, you'd probably have about an hour and a half or something, so dedicate a good maybe half an hour to reading and absorbing before you then start producing anything. So that would be the case studies. The group exercise, I mean, there's a few myths about the group exercise. One of those being that you should always be the person that offers to be the chair. That can be a little bit the kiss of death, because if you're the person that's responsible for writing up what everyone's saying, whether that's on a laptop or whether it's on a flip chart, you can essentially become a glorified note taker and not participate in the discussion as much as the others if you take on that role. So it's one to be taken on with caution. I think there's certain things that, regardless of the company, regardless of their competency model that they're looking to assess, are going to be winners. So things like thanking others for their contributions or praising their contributions, bringing in quieter members of the group. So they might say, oh, Neil, I noticed that you haven't spoken yet. I'd be really keen to hear your views. What do you think on XYZ?
Yeah.
So all of those are really good cooperative behaviours, acting as the time check. So group exercises are usually assessing soft skills like communication and interpersonal collaboration, but they might assess things like your conscientiousness, your drive towards achieving the group's goal. And if you're the person that says, we're now halfway through, and I don't believe we're halfway through the work that we've got ahead of us, I think we might need to pick up the pace a little bit. Does everyone agree?
Yeah.
That kind of thing is a really nice way of getting some immediate ticks against your name, I would say, on that competency.
Yeah, makes sense. Within the kind of the group task, is there an element of like you play the game? You can think, I think I know what they want. I think I know what these people will want to see, so I'm going to give it, as opposed to being yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I would always advise people to be themselves, because if you, let's say you manage to fake it, you manage to fake being a cooperative, friendly person, and actually you're incredibly disruptive and argumentative. Once you're in the job, you're going to rub everyone up the wrong way, and you're probably going to not thrive. But I mean, that said, these group exercises, I mean, they do vary in length. So most of the time, they're at least half an hour, and the theory behind that is that you can fake for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But faking consistently for half an hour is hard. Often they're a bit longer than that. So I would say just be the best version of yourself. But there are some group exercises that are what are called micro exercises that might only be a couple of minutes long. I do think, and in those instances, the opportunity for you to fake good for 2 or 3 minutes is much higher. Again, I'd always say be yourself, but those little, like, polishing around the edges, like I just described, I think would stand you in good stead.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And also it speaks to that, it's the buzzword of the day, isn't it? But authenticity. I imagine that's kind of what employers want to see, someone being real, being themselves. And this is not technical skills, is it? This is about how you behave.
Yeah, they do try to design the exercises so that no technical knowledge is required. Sometimes obviously like a little bit of knowledge of the industry is useful, so you're hitting the ground running rather than needing to refer back to the glossary as you go through. But yes, they are behavioural. And I guess the other thing about authenticity is if you have had to sit a psychometric as well, so let's say you've sat a personality questionnaire and then you've been invited along to the assessment centre, what a good assessor will be doing is seeing whether you're congruent. So what you said you're like, does that mirror itself in the group exercise? And if it doesn't, then they might even raise that in the interview. They might say, oh, well, in your personality questionnaire, you said that you were very consultative and very affiliative and outgoing. Tell me more about that. And they might use what you say there to then explain your behaviour in another part of the assessment process. So it's easier to be authentic.
Yeah. That's good advice all round in everyday life, isn't it? Also, just to paint a bit of a picture. So let's say you're in a room with other people, you're working in teams. Are the assessors sort of sat around the edges, silently sort of watching you?
We do sometimes, just sit around the edges. They'll, in a group exercise, generally one assessor will be watching 2 people, and it's the person, generally it's the person diagonally opposite you that will be watching you. They are told not to interact with you. The reason for that is that if you're in a group discussion and you make a joke and the assessor laughs, that could be encouragement for you to carry on cracking jokes. And by the end of it, you've got a lot of evidence around your sense of humour, but not much around your commercial acumen. So I guess don't be disheartened if you're making humorous comments and someone's staring back at you stony faced. They're doing their job as an assessor, which is not to leak any cues to you about how well or badly you're doing during the assessment. So they're trying to stay neutral.
I mean, would the advice there to be as much as possible, pretend they're not there?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretend they're not there. Sometimes you might have a role play where you'll actually be interacting with the assessor themselves, and they'll be playing a role. They might be your manager, they might be a team member that's demotivated or something like that, and you need to coach them or give them a difficult message or whatever it might be. And typically that'll just be one-on-one, but sometimes there might again be that third silent observer sat in the corner watching the interaction. But again, in those situations, I mean, some people quite like role plays and they really get into it, and other people hate it. The thing to remember is, as long as there's more than one exercise, a good behavioural assessment process gives you more than one chance to demonstrate the skill. So
absolutely,
Yeah, so it might be in the group exercise, you're a bit quiet because you weren't confident around the subject matter. And that means that maybe your score on commercial acumen might be a little bit lower in the group exercise. But then in the case study, where it's just you and a computer and a whole load of lovely numbers to crunch and insights to deliver, you might score much higher. And then what they'll do is they'll look at that in the round, perhaps compiled with your personality questionnaire, and they say, right, well, this person's commercial acumen was really strong in the solo exercise. It was less strong in the group exercise, but then maybe that's explained by the fact they're quite an introverted personality. As long as they're going to have the capacity to do that commercial thinking alone for a fair portion of their job, they're going to be just as effective. So, yeah.
Just going back to sort of preparation for all this, you could be group, you could be one-to-one. Is there a sense the best preparation is to understand what might happen to you? So understand all the possible types of behavioural assessment. I'm imagining it's difficult, aside from practicing different types of, say, for example, role-playing in the mirror or with a friend. Is the best preparation just having a good grasp of what might happen?
One of the things that I'd say is try to find out what the assessment criteria are. So if you're applying to a large organization, up on their website, there'll be the company values at least. They might even have their something called a capability or competency framework or strengths framework. And that is very likely going to be what you're assessed against. So if you see on there that they've got a value of environmental awareness, then if, as part of your case study review, you decide to proactively include a bit about, have we considered the environmental impact of site B, then that's likely to give you extra credit. Likewise, if it's about being like they might have a value called one team, and it's all about working together, respecting difference, valuing differences. So if you know a little bit about your fellow assessment centre attendees, then you could say, well, actually, I'd really like to hear from so-and-so because I know that you've got a degree in X and I think that'd be a really valuable perspective. So that's going to push you right to the top of the charts on that value. So yeah, I think understanding the assessment criteria and having those front of mind as you're going through each exercise and thinking, how can I demonstrate this for the assessor in this context would be good.
Very similar to a job description, isn't it? So when you're applying with your CV or whatever, or the application, you want to make sure that if you're capable of answering all their questions in a job description, working out what they want the most and then looking at your experience and your education, trying to make it line up.
Yeah. And that's where I'd be maybe challenging yourself to, like, for example, if you are a little bit more shy and retiring, but there is a group exercise, then summoning up that inner strength at the start, maybe saying, how do we think we should organize things? So asking facilitative questions are great. I think the other thing is working a little bit on your mindset. There's quite a bit of work that we do in trying to minimize what we call stereotype threat. So it's essentially a phenomena where you might be going for a job somewhere and think people like me with my background or my kind of demographic characteristics don't fit in here, which can be really unhelpful when it comes to its impact on your behavior and in the exercises. So if you've got running through your head, oh, I don't know if they like me, I don't know if then that could interrupt your smooth delivery of an interview question response. It's reminding yourself that if you're through to the behavioral assessment stage, then in all likelihood, they could probably take you onto the job. Like you've passed the psychometrics, you've passed the CV and application form. So
yeah, you're quite far along, aren't you?
Yeah. So you should be going into it with confidence. Just thinking, what could I replace that with that's a more helpful mantra to have in my head? So rather than thinking, this person's nothing like me, they went to whatever, a private school or whatever, and I didn't, then thinking, well, actually, they said on their website that they value diverse thinking and viewpoints from all different perspectives. I can bring that. It's important to bear in mind that everyone's got their own unique skill set.
It's important to bear in mind that everyone.
Yeah. I imagine showing that you can work with different people as a candidate. Also, you touched upon confidence, and that's something I wanted to ask about. Is being careful with confidence. I imagine you want to be confident, but don't assume that you need to show how confident you are, because I imagine that can probably backfire as well.
Yeah, well, especially on graduate programs, one of the competencies that's usually looked for is, it would be called different things. It might be called learning orientation. It might be called self-development. But someone who is exceptionally confident in their own abilities / arrogant, slightly less complimentary, suggests that they might not be the most open to coaching. They might not be the most open to taking advantage of the development opportunities that the program will have on offer. I was helping someone to prepare earlier this week, and they were told specifically that they would be asked questions around their approach to development, and it's having a little think about, well, what development areas would I like to work on? What have I done that could demonstrate the fact that I'm not only aware of this, but I've tried out building this in the past? And they might ask you questions like, well, how could we support you in helping to develop that? And then it's treading that right balance, because you don't want to sound like you're going to need a huge amount of their time and resource, but at the same time, like showing enthusiasm, saying, I'd love to have the opportunity to shadow and then to receive feedback on how I'm doing. And I've sought that in the past when I've been on my course or whatever it might be. That all shows a certain level of humbleness and a certain level of appetite for growth, which is what they want from a graduate, not I'm the finished article, I'm perfect.
Yeah, I can imagine. It sounds like it's about striking a balance, isn't it? The one I believe that you can hit the ground running, but you're trainable and you're open to learning, but you also do bring certain qualities already to the table. I feel like this topic, there's always more we can go on to. This has been a really good introduction. How do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say to everyone, good luck in going for your behavioural assessments. If in the sad situation that you're not successful, then do ask for feedback, because that can be real gems for your next assessment centre. So see it as an opportunity to learn, not as a rejection.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you very much once again, Ben. It's always great to speak with you. Could you just read out your website? I think that's quite useful. People can find it in the notes.
Sure. My website is sten10.com, sten10.com. But it may be a resource that might be of even more use to the listeners is the Association for Business Psychology's website, which is the abp.org.uk. And I was the chair of the ABP for a couple of years, but there's lots of resources there that lift the lid on the world of occupational psychology and what we do as assessment designers that people might find interesting there as well.
Perfect. The more knowledge, the better. Well, listen, thank you very much once again, Ben, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again in the future. And thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you found this useful.
For more career advice, check out the ACCA Careers website and the Student Accountant app. And if you have something in particular you'd like me to cover in the series, get in touch at studentaccountant@acccaglobal.com.
This podcast was brought to you by ACCA. Find out how we think ahead at acccaglobal.com.